Hello and welcome back to WhitTips. Today we're going to be looking at the structure question for English Language Paper 1, question 3, and we're going to be focusing on beginnings and endings, and we're going to be thinking about how writers structure beginnings and endings of their text for prescribed effects, and also about how examiners edit texts to make sure that there is a specific effect there as well. So the question never changes for English Language Paper 1 question 3. It is always, how does the writer structure the text to interest you as a reader? 8 marks, and you always get the following 3 bullet points. What the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the text, how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, and any other structural features that interest you. Obviously for today we're looking at beginnings and endings, so we're looking a lot at that first bullet point, the beginning of the source, but then we're also going to be considering the ending, so we need to be thinking about how whatever has been mentioned at the beginning of a text has developed as the source has gone on. So a little tip from me, it's good practice to try and get into physically breaking the text up for yourself in assessments and exams. So if you've got a side or 2 sides of A4 of reading to do, physically draw a line on where you think the beginning ends, the middle starts, and then the end begins. So you can split it up into 3 sections of beginning, middle, and end, and then you can break it down and you can pick out the bits that you want to talk about from your beginning section. You can start to make links between sections as well, and hopefully that will improve your answers and help you to start to structure your answers in a bit more of a coherent way, because you're dealing with slightly less text, and you're also being able to move in and out of sections that you've created yourself. Your sections might be different from somebody else's sections, but that doesn't matter as long as you can justify why that sentence or those 3 paragraphs are the beginning or are the end or are the middle. That's all that matters. So thinking about beginning of texts then, we have some terminology here for you called narrative hooks. You may or may not have heard of these from your teachers in school. And underneath narrative hooks, they are kind of what they say. They are ways that writers hook you in to their books, to their stories. And there's many different ways in which they can do that. And there's a little list here that we'll go through today. And then it's about seeing as you continue your reading, thinking about, oh yeah, that's an example of a question to open a text. Okay, so you can start to try and apply some of these different narrative hooks, story hooks that writers use. So the first one on here is a character or narrator voice, probably the most common one. So here you have a narrator talking to you that you kind of meet for the first time, or a character talking to you that you meet for the first time, and you start to understand their voice, okay, and their personality a little bit, because all characters and all narrators are different, and they're different from the writer as well, and it's important to understand that. So you just genuinely get a voice of somebody talking to you, beginning to tell you a story. So like I said, most stories will begin in this way, and some of these hooks, it's important to note, can apply more than once. So you might find yourselves doubling up terminology here, which again is good. The exam board tells us that terminology will be rewarded if it adds to analysis, and all these statements and all these narrative hooks here should add focus to your analysis of structure. Dialogue, as is what it says, it's some speech, so some people talking, so your text opens with a conversation between 2 characters or more, so that's another way that we can be hooked in. We're into a conversation straight away, we're listening in, and then it's all about what is being said as well. So the terminology of the technique is dialogue. Again, to get good marks in this question, then you have to go into what is being said and who is saying what, and what that reveals about each particular character as well. Another common way to open is with a piece of description. It might be a description of a setting, or it might be a description of a character. And again, then it's about some of those details, some of those hints, if you will, that the writer is about to drop for you. So again, you can talk about what is being described, and they've hooked you in with this description, but then you're going to need to go in and pick out little bits of the text to be able to say what the description reveals, and how. Don't forget, the question is always about how that is interesting to you, okay? And again, that will be different for each person. Another narrative hook is a question. So there might be an opening question as an opening sentence, and then throughout the text, it will be unpicked in some way. So a text might start off with an example of why did I do that? And then we'll find out what it is that's been done. And again, we'll think about the order and then why they did it, hopefully by the end of the extract as well. So again, about making those links between sections. That might be your opening, that might be your beginning, a question as a narrative hook. Why did I do that? And then you have to go on to the middle to try and find out what it is that they've done before in the end you find out why they did it. Another kind of variant on that one, I suppose, is a thematic statement. So you might have something along the lines of, all dogs are dangerous, for example, and then underneath that big theme, you'll start to unpick it again a little bit more and talk about maybe some specific dogs or a specific incident with a dog that the character and the narrator might have had. But a big sweeping statement at the beginning, again, which it hooks us in, because when it's a big statement like that, like all dogs are dangerous, we might be thinking, well, my dog's not. So we need to read a little bit more to understand this perspective and this point of view that we've got here from this narrator. So often those big theme statements, they hook us in because they challenge our beliefs and ideologies, and therefore we want to see why that character has got to that statement. In medias res, then, it means in middle of the action. So sometimes we don't always start chronologically at the beginning of the text. We might start right in the middle of a police chase, but not know who the police are chasing or why they're chasing them. So look out for those type of texts where the action has already begun and you're joining it halfway through. Likewise, with that police chase, we might start with some dramatic action. So these two terms, again, might be used in synchronization here, but some kind of dramatic action. We're in the middle of a war zone. So something's already happened and we're in the middle of a football match. So we're right in the middle of some piece of dramatic action starting. Linking and sticking with action, then we could have some ominous action. So we might have a hook opening line where, and it might not be an opening line, it's worth bearing that in mind, it's where you draw your beginning again. So it might be at the end of the second paragraph, for example, but there might be a statement along the lines of, at this point, I knew I was going to die. So there is this setting up of the action that's going to come on. So something's ominous, something's going to happen, and we have to kind of keep going with the writer on this journey until they choose to tell us when that's going to happen. And the last one that's on there, flashbacks and flash forwards. So there might be a flash forward to the future as an opening to text, or it might be a flashback to some action that's already happened. They don't need too much explanation, but there's two more what we say higher brow terms if you want to use analepsis and prolepsis, if you want to try and push that vocabulary and not use flashbacks and flash forwards. So these are all nice ways in which writers can hook us into the text. So try and look out for different examples of these when you open a text or an assessment or a book that you're reading. On any particular page, think, right, what is the writer doing here? What is the hook in that I'm going to try to perhaps follow through? And that's the important thing. These begin something because they're all beginnings. Then you've got to try and follow it through in your analysis and with your reading and your understanding to try and get to the point that the writer wants to get to. And if you go back to the earlier structure video that we did, it's all about that writer's purpose, okay, why they're doing that. And these are some methods that you can use to say how they achieve it or not, whatever it is that they're trying to do in their purpose. With endings, then, as I said, that's the way in which we can be hooked into the beginning. Then we need to think about when we're doing our own writing and as a writer is structuring their text, where we want to end the journey with our reader. So there's different ways of ending a text. Now you might finish in some cyclical structure, so you might come back to wherever it was that you were at the beginning. So if you start your text off sat at a bus stop talking to somebody, you might finish with the same image sat at the bus stop talking to somebody. Look out for changes in that though. You might start by talking to somebody sat at the bus stop, but then by the end of it, your character, your narrator, perhaps is still there at the bus stop, but the person that they're sat with may have changed, or they may now be on their own. And again, if you can read and you can pick these things out and not just say that it's a cyclical structure because they're still sat in the same place where they began the story, but you can pick out those other changes behind there, then you'll start to push through that format barrier into some of those higher grades on this question. So you've got cyclical structure there. Resolution. We all like to make sure that something is resolved by the end of the text. So your text might start with that question, might be with that problem, and by the end of it, that problem has been worked out. That question has been answered, and there is some resolution to the conflict that was within the text. And we'll look at structure within text in future videos. It might finish on some kind of revelation where there is some kind of perhaps scandal that's been built up to, or some kind of key moment that's been built up to. Now, in terms of revelation, then the classic, I suppose, is students will use the term cliffhanger, which is nice, but again, you want to try and push that vocabulary a little bit and think about why it's a cliffhanger, what has been revealed to make it and turn it into a cliffhanger. And the classic example is always like the end of EastEnders, for example. There's always that moment where somebody just walks into the room, or somebody says something, or somebody's found something out, and that revelation before you get the do-do-do-do-dum, whatever it is. So revelation is an important one as well. On a similar line then, this idea that by the end of the text, either the character or the reader has had some kind of an epiphany, which is this moment of realization. We've realized something. It's ever so slightly different from revelation, but we've realized something about the character. We learned something that we didn't know. And sometimes that's explicit and sometimes it's implicit. Sometimes you've got to read inferences to try and draw that out a little bit as well. But there is this moment of realization at the end of the text where we think, yes, that's what's happened there. So not quite a cliffhanger, but a moment of realization, and we call that an epiphany. And the last one again on there in media res is the Latin phrase for in the midst of the action. So sometimes we get the extract and it's just cut off, or even a full novel, it's just cut off right in the middle of the story where we want to perhaps try and find out exactly what happened and what was resolved from it. So there's no resolution to that one. We're being stopped right in the middle of the action where we want to try and find out a little bit more and see how things are played out, but the writer, for whatever reason, chooses not to reveal that to us. So let's have a look at trying to apply that to some text then. We're going to use the extract from Spies by Michael Frame, which is in the AQA English Language Reading Resource Paper 1 pack. I'll put the link to that in the comments below if you want to have a look at that extract. Before we start to analyse and go through the beginning and ending of this extract, you might want to have a read through yourself and think about splitting that text up. Where would you say that your beginning ends? Where does your middle begin? Hopefully that's the same point. And then where does your ending begin? Okay, and physically break up that page and see and think about why you've made those choices, and try and think about some of that terminology that we've just talked to. Can you apply any of it? So have a pause, have a read through. If you don't want to read it through, there is a video of myself reading it. I'll put the link to that as well, so you can listen and track it with me reading over the text for you as well. And then we'll come back and we'll have a look at trying to analyse and pick out some things to talk about from the beginning and ending of this extract. Okay, so for the beginning of this then, we have a narrative hook, which is the narrator's voice, and there's an element of a flashback to this. I'm looking at this, the opening line as key. Where the story began, though, was where most of our projects and adventures began, at Keith's house. Quite a straightforward, simple opening line, but we get this idea that from the narrator's voice that this is a box standard story. This is going to be some kind of flashback, somebody remembering their youth, if you will, their childhood, and they've got a friend, Keith, and also that they are quite into projects and adventures, and they had perhaps a lot of fun as their childhood. Nothing seems out of the ordinary whatsoever. Everything seems fairly straightforward. However, as we read on, we start to realise that the narrator is quite unreliable and not very trustworthy, and makes actually reading this text quite difficult because he keeps changing his mind. So at the beginning, as we transition, and think about that word that I've just used there and try and get that into your writing, as we transition into the second paragraph, the narrator corrects himself. No, wait. I would try and write it down like that, thinking about the transition and using that little quotation, no way. I've got that wrong, he says to us. Now, we're trusting, we're on this journey with this narrator who's telling us his story, and he's not quite sure of his story himself, which makes it interesting for us because we're dealing with here, the writer's purpose, perhaps, to go back to that, is to think about how hard it is sometimes to recall things from memory. And this narrator is having some real difficulty with that, and we're sharing in his difficulty as the reader, and that's what makes it interesting. We were interested here, and our interest is piqued by the fact that he can't quite remember what's happened in what order, and therefore he knows that there's something significant's happened, and we want to go with him on this journey to try and find out why. But we're having to constantly we're being made to think and challenge, and everything that we assume is right, he'll then go back and he'll change, and we could follow that thread through then from the beginning about this unreliable narrative voice that's began this text. Like we said, there is elements of a flashback here, and I've drawn my beginning at the end of my beginning here with the last line of the third paragraph, because I think this is important, and it's this last bit here that Keith so calmly and quietly dropped his bombshell. Now we're really interested, because this is a piece of dramatic action. Keith's got a bombshell to drop for us here, but we don't know what it is. And as we read on through this, we see the writer digress and the narrator digress, and they don't tell us virtually until the end and the last line what Keith's bombshell is. Okay, so we're in the middle of this kind of dramatic action. What is this bombshell? And we have to go through this unreliable narrator's memory to try and get to the end of the extract to find out what the bombshell was, so you can connect the two together there. So in the beginning, there is a story. We've got this unreliable narrator. We know that there's been some adventure at Keith's house here. We know that Keith's going to drop some kind of massive bombshell, but we don't know what it is till we get to the end. So we're already starting to think then, as we transition to the end, that it does link to the beginning, because there is both, as you look here, and I've taken my end from the penultimate paragraph, from those 6 random words. I'd use that as a quotation. Those 6 random words. He doesn't tell us. Still doesn't make it easy for us. Those 6 random words anyway came everything that followed. Why not just tell us the word? Because he wants to make us wait. He wants to make it delay. He's trying to crank up that tension in the reader and show how painful and how difficult it is for this narrator to draw things from his memory. But we know at the end of it, this final line here is about my mother. This is Keith's bombshell. My mother is a German spy. And throughout there, he's revealed to us that his childhood is probably set during wartime. We've got all the clues and hints throughout the text there that we could also pursue as structural features. And with this, then, we've got both resolution, because we wanted to know at the beginning what the bombshell was. We've also finished here on revelation, because he's revealed to us, and the narrator's finally managed to pluck it from his memory, that his mum is a German spy. Living in England at that time would have been quite a scandalous thing, no doubt. And we also finish right in the middle of the action here, in medias res. We finish in right in the middle of the action, because just as we learn about maybe why this policeman arrived here, we want to know, because we're doubting the narrator throughout, if this is actually true. So right in the middle of the action, right in the middle of Keith's bombshell that his mother was a German spy, we're now left. We're left at the end of this with no resolution in some cases. Yes, all right, we've learned there's a spy, but we don't know if that's true or not, because he's corrected himself so many times throughout the text. Is this a childhood game that they're playing? Is this really the fact that her mother was arrested as a German spy? Is there something that's just got to be corrected in his memory again? So it does leave with quite a lot of questions as well as resolution. And those, again, going for those higher marks, we'll be able to discuss that in detail, and not just say there's resolution or there's not resolution, but to have the discussion around it and try and develop other interpretations of how the writer has structurally left this text for us as reader, and again how the examiner has cut it off at this point for us as the reader, to give us something to talk about and to challenge us. Okay, so pay attention to everything that you're reading. Try and think about, if a teacher or an examiner has given you an extract from a novel, why have they chose to start it there? Why are they choosing to finish it there? Again, if you're reading a book at home and you're reading the opening page, think about how it started. And as you go to the end, think about how they finish it, and try and go back and apply this terminology. Hopefully that's been of use to you. Like I said, I'll put the link to the extract and the booklet below in the comments, so you can have a read through that for your studies and your revision.